The Miami Dolphins' struggles against playoff teams the last few years have been well documented, but just how deeply rooted are the issues? I hope you're sitting down.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, a presentation of facts that as I got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into, became very apparent that we needed to do a show on this storyline from all angles, and specifically through the lens of why the Dolphins maybe made some upheaval decisions with the direction of the franchise this offseason, and why I think it was probably necessary due to some of the warts and flaws and shortcomings and limitations, etc., etc., etc. So I'm going to do my best Borat impression here. We're going to have a fun time today on the show. Not looking at all of these shortcomings, how deeply rooted they are against playoff teams during the Mike McDaniel era. So from 2022, 2023, and 2024 combined, the Dolphins obviously have posted a winning record. They've had a lot of success against teams that are not represented in the playoffs. But the issues have been finding wins and playing complementary football against the best of the best. And when you have a perennial divisional or conference championship contender in your division that you have to tackle and solve the riddle of that football team, and you don't do any of these things particularly well, it's going to make your life really, really hard. So I want to put the Dolphins in the last 3 years under a certain context. They've played 20 games against playoff teams in the last 3 seasons. They are 4-16 in those 20 football games the last 3 years. That 20% win percentage is tied for the 8th worst in the NFL. Tennessee, New Orleans, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Carolina Panthers, the Chicago Bears, the Arizona Cardinals, and the New York Giants are worse. The Dolphins are tied with the Patriots and the LA Rams at win percentage of 20% over this period and stretch of time. So before we go any further, and we're getting into challenges and fourth downs and special teams and offense and defense and all of the areas, just to kind of, show how deeply rooted these issues are, because it becomes a very popular thing to do, to kind of point the finger at one individual culprit on the football team, whoever you think that may be, to kind of understand just how problematic these performances have been. It kind of reminds me of a NBA team who kind of underwent close to around the same time, underwent that highly publicized, highly scrutinized rebuild process that was really geared towards draft capital and draft picks and the process, right? The 76ers. And the Philadelphia 76ers had their trust the process rebuilding ordeal, in which they got all the draft picks that led to the Ben Simmonses of the world and the Markelle Fultzes of the world and the Joel Embiids of the world. And just to make the basketball parallel, from 13, 14, 15, those 3 seasons, the NBA teams play 82 games. The Sixers won less than 50 games combined. It was an average of about 16 games per season for 3 years at 82 games per year. And then they loaded up on the draft picks and they're competitive, and they're going to the conference semis. Now, they never advanced past the conference semis. They won 52, 51, 43, and 30 during the COVID season, 49, 23, 51, 31, 54, 28, 47, 35. And then this year, the bottom fell out. The Sixers fell to 24 and 58. There's some injuries involved there, whatnot. But the Sixers did the thing where, like, it became apparent partway through a build that was really focused on draft capital and trying to kickstart the team with a bunch of extra assets, like the Dolphins did, that they didn't have the right coach. So they changed coaches from Brett Brown to Doc Rivers. And it kind of cost them some transitional window in the middle of their build, like you saw with the Dolphins with the Brian Flores to Mike McDaniel transition. But what the Sixers did, when they kept hitting the same glass ceiling over and over and over and over and over again, they kept throwing, and it's a little different with basketball because there's only 5 guys on the court at one time, right? But they kept throwing like another big contract at it. They kept throwing like, well, we're really close, so let's pull the wool over our eyes and pay Tobias Harris. Well, then they did the Tobias Harris thing didn't work well, and they had the Jimmy Butler experiment that was short-lived in that period of time, and Butler got toxic with the team. They brought in a big-time talent that seemed to have some trouble playing nice in the sandbox with other guys, like a Tyreek Hill. And just like it happened with Tyreek Hill in Miami, the issues of like the tiger doesn't change the stripes. It happened in Philadelphia with Jimmy Butler, and then he goes to the Heat. And then the same thing happens in Miami that happened in all the other stops, and then he goes to Golden State. But the Sixers just kept throwing another big thing at it, right? Like their most recent big thing was Paul George. And they just said, oh, we're close. One more. Oh, one more big swing, one more big investment. And now the entire infrastructure of the basketball team has fallen apart. And for all the Dolphins fans that have voiced their concerns that this team had reached its ceiling, they are telling you they agree with you with what they are choosing to do, where you're talking about moving on from Jalen Ramsey and letting some players walk and kind of having a foundation where you're kind of resetting the money for the next cyclical build to not just pull the wool over their eyes and say, oh, we're close. Let's do it again, just like you did last year. Where you could say, oh, well, injuries didn't work out our way. We feel like we're close. Let's empty the chamber on a couple of free agents. Let's trade our first round draft pick to get another big contract player in here. Because if they'd have done that, you'd wake up and you'd be 24 and 58 or the NFL equivalent. And you'd say, we're really handcuffed here. So when you look at all of the issues that we're going to go through here, and I have an embarrassingly long laundry list of like bottom 5 in the NFL in metrics in special teams, defense and offense. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 25 bullet points long in all phases of the football team. When you really zoom out and you look at the performance against the best of the best, some upheaval was needed. And I, for one, am glad that they're making and starting this process of kind of resetting and retransitioning and taking the nucleus of what we think is right about this football team and try to build up around it again, instead of just pulling the wool over your eyes and say, oh, well, we did the whole process for this and we're close, so let's sign Paul George. Because it didn't work out for that basketball team. And I think you'd be lying to yourself to ignore all of the overwhelming data that when you really sit down and you're objective about the football team, where it needs to be better. I'll get a little bit of the coaching and special teams. We'll get offense and defense. We'll get it all tied in here on today's episode of the show. So sit down, buckle in, stick with us. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player. There's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. So if you're looking for your favorite player to hit that clutch last-minute shot or rooting for that underdog seed to pull off the upset, FanDuel now gives you a chance to get $200 in bonus bets to add to the excitement of your NBA playoff run if your first $5 bet with FanDuel hits. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head over to FanDuel.com. Place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. How's that? A little NBA analogy to go with our NBA playoffs message from our friends over at FanDuel. But to keep this back to football, I now am going to start to work through this list of, and it's coaching, it's offense, it's defense, it's special teams. So you maximized, and there were a lot of things that I liked about the Dolphins build during this period of time. And I think they probably pushed some wrong buttons that as the choose your own adventure played out, and you went from page 20 to page 65 and then went back to page 40 because you chose to let this guy walk in free agency. You kind of maximized the vision with the group that you had. But it starts at the top. Mike McDaniel, 20% successful challenge rate against postseason participants during his 3-year tenure as the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, and 45% success rate and conversion rate on fourth downs. That's the 6th worst total in the NFL against playoff teams in the last 3 years combined. Less than 50% of the time when they go for it on fourth down, they don't get it, right? And I know I don't have the exact statistics of score and time left in the game, but I could think of multiple occasions in which Miami is aggressively going for it on fourth down with a deficit score way earlier than the norms of a football game would suggest or indicate would be the time in which you should be going for it on fourth down. And we've talked about those negative game scripts and how it really seems to get Mike McDaniel himself out of sync and out of rhythm. And it feels like kind of the worst thing that could have happened was the first game he coached with a deficit, a big deficit. The Dolphins come back from 21 points down in the fourth quarter because it kind of reinforced that psychology as a football team. And that's what happened when the Dolphins came back on the Ravens in that legendary early September win. And for as little as it meant because it was an early September win, it was still one of the most iconic football games this football team has played in recent memory. An all-time great comeback in the history of the franchise. And I don't say that to diminish the feat that the team put on display. I was there that day. It was an incredible game. But it was the first time you met that adversity, and the response rate was, oh, see, we can come back from anything at any time with a strike of lightning. And it feels like the 3 years since you get into negative game scripts. And when that happens, the challenges kind of become a little bit more haphazard. The fourth down election to go for it only further compounds the issues. And I think that is further fueled by some of the stats you'll find on the defensive side of the ball. For example, the Dolphins have the 3rd worst opponent starting field position in games against playoff opponents over the last 3 years in the league. The opposing teams average starting at the 31.5-yard line, all the possessions combined from all 20 of those games. And some of that is going for it near midfield, I would say prematurely. Now, I want to get through the special team stuff before we get into all the defensive numbers. This is our Danny Crossman Memorial chapter of today's show. 3rd worst opponent starting field position after kickoffs. That comes despite having the 10th highest touchdown or touchback percentage of any team in the league. So only 9 teams kicked more touchbacks, and yet after a kickoff, the Dolphins had the third worst opponent starting field position after kickoff. So that's not including going forward on the fourth downs and all that. That's yardage conceded on kickoff returns. They were the second worst yards per kickoff return, 28.2 yards per return over the last 3 years against playoff opponents. They're dead last in the NFL in opponent punt return yardage. So no team has conceded more yards per punt return over the last 3 years than the Dolphins. And that's compounded in part by what was the game-deciding score in the fourth quarter in Week 18 against Buffalo in 2023. They're third lowest in percentage of punts that had landed and were downed inside the opponent's 20-yard line. So pinned inside the 20, it was 32%. League average is 38. And 4 teams, San Francisco, Buffalo, New Orleans, and Green Bay, all had over 44% of their punts. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you. But there were 4 teams that had nearly 50% of their punts were downed inside the 20-yard line against playoff opponents. The Dolphins at 32%, third lowest or third worst percentage in the league. I think that's about it for the special teams element. So you see the coaching struggles with some of the game management type stuff, the challenges, the fourth downs, the special teams, even further compounding the field position issues is the return rates that you're conceding that were among all of those numbers were at least third worst or worse than third worst in the NFL from a special teams perspective for both kick and punt coverage and execution on kickoffs. Defensively, this team is tied for third worst in the NFL in total turnovers forced in the last 3 seasons against playoff opponents. They're tied for last with interceptions. They have 8 interceptions in 20 games against playoff opponents the last 3 years combined. Combined 8 interceptions. So when you look at the secondary and you reconcile, just like you look at the special teams coach and you reconcile, well, they changed the special teams coach. They brought in a new punter. They've kind of rehauled and revamped and targeted some defensive back 7 players that can contribute on special teams. They brought in Nick Westbrook-Ikine, who can be a special teams participant. They overhauled the entirety of the secondary, in part because they have not forced turnovers. They're tied for 5th in yards per attempt allowed defensively against playoff opponents, 7.9, almost 8 yards per attempt allowed the last 3 years combined. So I tried when I could to not use raw numbers like total interceptions or total turnovers, right? Because that can be dependent on there were teams that played an extra 10 games against playoff opponents than what the Dolphins did in the last 3 years combined. So when you acknowledge there is some inherent flaw, because we're being totally fair and just presenting data on today's show, there's some inherent flaw with raw data when you played less games against those teams that qualify for those metrics than everybody else. Or not everybody else. There were teams that also played 20, 21, 22 games. But other teams. Which is what makes efficiency metrics like 7.9 yards per attempt, which is tied for 5th worst. It makes that much more of a gut punch. It makes 4th worst in points per drive allowed defensively, almost 2.5 points per drive allowed. So opposing teams, every time they possess the ball, are averaging, I'm going to do math, 5/6 of a field goal every time they touch the ball. Across 3 years in 20 games. They're 7th worst in percentage of drives in which they force a punt, 31%. So only 3 out of every 10 possessions they force a punt. And they're in the bottom 3 in total turnovers. You look at it through the EPA, right? The EPA, they actually measure pretty well against the run. But as you would expect with the least amount of interceptions and the 5th worst yards per attempt allowed, they're 5th worst defensively against the pass. And they're 27th in the NFL in total EPA defensively per game played against playoff opponents. That's despite being 5th in the NFL this year. So from 2022 and 2023, the Miami Dolphins defense was dead last in the NFL in EPA per game defensively against playoff opponents. We haven't even talked, like everybody talks about the success rate of this team against playoff teams and looks at quarterback wins and Tua, and there's some Tua stats that are going to be in here in segment 3. We haven't even talked about the offense yet. And you could see just how deeply rooted some of the flaws exist on the other elements of the football team. So for kind of the new direction, kind of a refocus around some new pieces, I get it. And I'd rather, and if you have been dissatisfied with the ceiling of this Dolphins football team the past couple of years, everybody should agree with this, that this was a good decision to make for the competitive nature of the football team. They'd hit the ceiling and there were too many holes. And you can get into if the people that are in charge are the right people to be in charge. Like, that's a whole other can of worms, and I'm not here to do that right now. Just like I know somebody's just going to read the title of today's show without watching a second of it, and they're going to dump onto a Tagovailoa, or they're going to dump on the offensive line. And those elements have their issues as well. But I'm 21 and a half minutes in, and the only time I've talked about either one of those things is to tell you how many other things are wrong before we even got to it. So we're going to talk about the offense and some of the eye-opening and alarming numbers on that side of the ball against playoff opponents as we continue to work through how deeply rooted the playoff opponent issue is with this Dolphins team coming out of 2024 during the 3-year Mike McDaniel era. That's next here, Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. What would it mean to eliminate the I don't know excuse from your family's routine? For example, my daughter just started gymnastics. I was starting to get a little worried whether she was going to end up being an athlete. And if she wasn't, that'd be totally fine. But saw her at her first gymnastics practice. And I'll be honest, up until like yesterday morning, I forgot she had it. Well, Skylight can provide that answer and help provide clarity to you and your family throughout the week and month ahead. Right now, Skylight is offering listeners on Locked On $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That is skylightcal.com/NFL. The irony out of all of this is that the numbers on the offensive side of the ball, well, depending if you're talking running game or passing game, these are the least inflammatory numbers that I have for you, to be honest. Now, the run game stuff is horrendous, and we teased some of this yesterday on the show. 3rd and 4th down and 4 yards or less. So those are qualified as your short yardage run situations. 2nd worst first down rate in the NFL on 3rd downs. 47.8%. So less than 50% of the time when they run the ball on 3rd and 4th and 4 or less, they're not getting a first down. They're dead last in yards before contact in those situations, negative half a yard. This is just against playoff teams. You expand it to all teams, and the number is just as bad. But against playoff teams, negative half a yard before contact on 3rd and 4th down runs and 4 yards or less. Why? I went through and watched him. You're spending a whole lot of time running outside the numbers, trying to run outside, counter pivot toss, stretch, crack toss, wide receiver. Braxton Berrios is trying to crack down on a defensive end or a rush linebacker that outweighs him by 70 pounds. You got Devon Achane against Tennessee. And that's not an example that's applicable through the playoff picture, but I watched all the rushes, not just against the playoff opponents, but against all opponents. Yeah, Devon Achane on the point out of a bunch, trying to block and crack and set the edge for a Jalen Wright outside run going to the left. There's too much of that. And again, that's why you go back to what's fundamentally different about the players that they've pursued this offseason, and that physicality component to potentially encourage this team to be a little bit more downhill. It exists. It's there. But it's not just the running game, although they do have the second least rushing first downs of any team in the NFL. It's less than 100 in 20 games against playoff opponents. They are tied for 8th worst in the NFL in turnover EPA lost per game. That comes in tandem with they're tied for 6th in the NFL in interceptions thrown against playoff opponents. It's 25 in 20 games, despite being dead last in pass attempts in the NFL. There's 790 dropbacks, 714 actual pass attempts. So least amount of pass attempts against playoff teams of any team. Yet you have the second least rushing first downs. And you have the 6th most interceptions. And the EPA on interceptions is 5th worst for EPA lost due to interceptions thrown. But you're also dead last in the NFL in DPIs called. 4. You've got 4 DPIs called against 20 playoff opponents in the last 3 years combined. It's good for 1 1/3 DPIs per season against playoff teams. You need to be more physically present at the catch point. So it's receivers. It's routes that are run wrong. It's decision-making from the quarterback. And it's very easy to just focus this entire conversation through the lens of, well, the quarterback has some physical limitations. He's not the most fluid. He's not the most fleet of foot. He's not the most explosive in the open field. He's not really going to beat you all that consistently with his legs. And you really don't want him to, because then you're worried about the durability element of him. And teams that force him to throw into more low percentage throws with a greater frequency throughout the course of the game, there hasn't been consistent execution across 60 minutes. And it's led to more variance with how you are successfully able to move the ball. And it's very easy to look and point at that. And there's valid criticism there that exists to say, hey, you got to put the game on your back. You got to put the game on your shoulders, and they're going to force you to make the high degree of difficulty throws down and then down out for 60 minutes. And we haven't seen it. And it's factual. Now I'll say you can look at quarterback success rate, EPA per dropback, and against playoff teams, Tua is grades across all quarterbacks in the last 3 years combined. He grades as a league average quarterback in those situations. So he's obviously off the charts good against non-playoff opponents. And he's about a league average player across the scope of all NFL quarterbacks that are taking snaps and playing against playoff teams the last 3 years from a quarterback success rate and EPA per dropback standpoint. He needs to be better to be the player that you want him to be, to justify the investment that you've made in him. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. But when you take drop off from one of the best in the league to league average against the best of the best, and you combine it with catastrophic failures from a run game perspective, from a game management perspective, from a special teams perspective, and from a defensive perspective, what do we like? What do you expect the team record's going to be other than a 20% win percentage? And all of that adds up to the flaws that exist when playing the best of the best, that I think fully warrants, regardless of hot seat, regardless of pressure to win, regardless of fan irritation and irritability that is very real and exists. And I feel, and I don't work for the team, even though some of you guys apparently think that I do, because I don't dump on the team every day when I come on here for 30 minutes because I don't see the productivity in that, and bemoaning and continuing to obsess over changes that could have or should have or arbitrarily should have been made. But regardless of the pressure to win, if you are going to quadruple down on this again next year, what it's been, it's the definition of insanity, expecting a different result. So I, for one, fully embrace kind of a new realized vision with a renewed core to kind of reset, recycle, and try again. And you're hoping, because we all want the team to be successful, you're hoping this year the team overachieves. And if the team overachieves with the transitions that they make, and that can inspire the confidence that you need for this team to push play moving forward and really pour assets into the next version of the team, because they, in theory, would have learned from the mistakes that they've made over the past 3-4 years, or the previous build that you tried to maximize when you realized halfway through you were kind of stuck and you made some mistakes, and then you had to make some significant changes and bring in a new head coach, and he's got to go through some learning lessons, and he's doing it while you're in kind of the peak and pinnacle of your competitive cycle. And if they don't overachieve, and if they don't show improvement, despite a renewed vision on what the ancillary and complementary pieces of the roster need to look like, then you make a change. It'll be a big year for the Dolphins. Kind of apply some lessons learned after some cold, hard facts about where this team has not been up to par against the best of the best, which, in short, which I'd hope you get after 32 minutes, is not just the offensive line. It's just not the quarterback. It's been pretty much everywhere. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins, your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Go Fins.